Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us in person and virtually for what is about to be a rich discussion between our collective, Remains and Archive, and the artists who have contributed to the Slavery in Motion project. My name is Kevin Ah-Sen, and I am a PhD candidate at McGill University, and with me is Samantha Stephens, PhD candidate at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And we are 2/3 of Remains and Archive, a collective of graduate students from across disciplines who explore archipelagos of grief by way of Black feminist thought.
Remains and Archive began as a microlab supported by the Mellon-funded Diaspora Solidarities Lab, fiercely led by Dr. Yomira Figueroa Vasquez, professor and director of the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College, and Dr. Jessica Marie Johnson, associate professor in history at Johns Hopkins University and director of Live X Code, Digital Humanities Against Enclosure. Martinican poet and philosopher Edouard Glissant's ideas of relation, community, and connection inspire our scholarly and creative practices. Glissant writes in Poetics of Relation, quote, "The Caribbean is a sea that explodes the scattered lands into an arc, a sea that diffracts. The reality of archipelagos in the Caribbean or the Pacific provides a natural illustration of the thought of relation." End quote. We're gathered here tonight to think openly across disciplines, geographies, and our relations to histories of colonialism, displacement, and empire. The archipelago, a group of islands connected by the tides, currents, and waves of the sea, models how we have approached slavery in motion and our interest in working across the Black diaspora. Together we ask, how does grief work its way across archipelagic and diasporic thinking? What are spaces for refusing genocide, anonymity, and erasure in a death-dealing world? And what is required of us to be witnesses of such terror?
Slavery in Motion emerged from our third member, Jessica Newby's current dissertation project, titled Kinship in Motion, Women and Slavery in 18th Century Jamaica. Combining our collective's interest in archival research, histories of racial slavery, and art, Slavery in Motion is an experimental project that attempts to bridge the seeming disjunction between academic research and the creative world. Jessica's attentive and careful writing of the story of an enslaved woman named Malia at once negotiates the violent and fragmented archives of slavery and attends to the precarity of Black life in 18th century Jamaica. And as Jessica aptly notes about the enslaved women and girls she writes about, that they, quote, demanded not only a determined, but often a creative will to survive a variety of dangers that arose and coincided at any given time, end quote. At this moment, we would like to invite Jessica to share a few words about Malia and her story.
In the mid-18th century, a young girl was taken from her home in West Africa as a captive of the Atlantic slave trade. Presumed by her captors to be an Igbo and 15 years old, she stood at just 4 feet 6 inches tall. Her name was Malia. Following her capture, Malia spent weeks aboard a slaving vessel, surviving a long and harrowing Middle Passage voyage across the sea before finally reaching the shores of the prodigious gold mine and death trap that was the British colony of Jamaica. Her captors brought her to the parish of Westmoreland, where she was again sold and passed from the hands of one owner to another. He cemented his mastery by taking her name away from her, replacing it with one of his own choosing, and by searing his initials into the flesh of her right shoulder. 1 week later, he sent her to work in the cane fields of the sugar estate, upon which he served as overseer. She would spend the next 7 years enduring many of the hardships, perils, and indignities that were common to enslavement in Jamaica. Grueling labor routines and unrelenting quotas of production, food scarcity and starvation, contagious and deadly diseases, cruel and frequent shows of violence from white masters, rampant sexual terrorism and abuse from white men, and the potent despair of being alone and kinless among strangers. Against all of these immeasurable odds, the young girl named Malia survived. And as the years passed, she grew into a woman. After 7 years of captivity, her life underwent another monumental change when she became the mother of a daughter, a baby girl named Sylvia. The two of them had just 15 months together before their owner would separate them, hiring Malia out to labor on a neighboring estate and forcing her to leave Sylvia behind. Sylvia became sick while her mother was away and died. Malia was never the same following the loss of her daughter. She would never have any more children, and she also refused to stay in place. Over the course of the next 6 years, she ran away from her owner no less than 14 times. She ran through thunder and lightning storms. She ran while wearing heavy iron collars, pothooks, and chains around her neck. She ran even after she was punished by her owner with brutal floggings, more brandings, and solitary confinements. Nothing he tried or did deterred her. After the last and longest of her escapes, exactly 29 days, Malia's owner sold her to yet another, who transported her away from Jamaica and to the port town of Savannah, Georgia. These facts are pieces and fragments that have been foraged from an archive of abject violence and dehumanization. They have been extracted, resourced, and painstakingly reconstructed into a narrative that is without a definitive beginning or a conclusive ending. Its incompletion is both the tragedy and the outrage of Malia's archival record and others like it. These fragmented moments that I have just described of capture, coerced labor, motherhood, fugitivity, rebellion, and death that are recorded in a slave owner's diary are the sole pieces of evidence that she and Sylvia ever lived at all. They are imperfect. They are messy. They are insufficient. And yet, they are history. They are all that remain of Malia, the tiny young African girl who survived the Middle Passage, survived Jamaica itself, grew into womanhood, had and lost a daughter, and refused to stop running. Slavery in Motion is a project that has been more than a decade in the making. Many years ago, I came across a story of slavery in Jamaica that intrigued, devastated, and attached itself to me in ways that I did not expect, and that would take more than a decade to come into realization. For those years, and for hundreds of years before it, Malia's story has been submerged within narratives written about the man who owned and terrorized her and made his fortune from her labors. She has been but a supporting character in the master narrative of his life, a shadow relegated to the periphery of his central orbit. The work of inverting the pull and force of that orbit and bringing Malia to the center of historical memory has unfolded gradually upon a long and at times a difficult road. It has evolved over years of personal growth and maturation. It has required extensive reading, study, and contemplation. It has been improved with the support, guidance, and encouragement of brilliant senior scholars and advisors. It has been furthered with the utilization of interdisciplinary research methods and it has blossomed with consultation and collaboration with thinkers, innovation, and creativity that comes from outside of the walls of the Academy. That collaboration is why we are gathered here this evening. While not without its challenges, this journey and responsibility of finding, stewarding, sharing, and ultimately collaborating with the 4 artists of the Slavery in Motion project has been a great honor and privilege. Our microlab is both awed and immensely grateful to each one of them for so generously sharing their talents, their intellect, and their vision over the past year and a half as we brought this project into fruition together. I am a better historian and Black Studies scholar for having known and collaborated with them. And Malia's place in history is all the more prominent and solidified for their contributions. While Slavery in Motion is a project that tells the story of one African woman and her child who were enslaved in Jamaica, it is also one that gives honor and acknowledgement to the many other enslaved ancestors who have come before us and who still depend upon us to remember their names and steward and pass down their stories so that they will never be forgotten. In honoring Malia and Sylvia, we also honor other enslaved ancestors of Jamaica and of the broader Black diaspora, whose names and stories are forever lost to historical memory. In honoring Malia and Sylvia, I also hope to bring honor to the names and memory of my own ancestors, such as Courtney Borns, a formerly enslaved and emancipated woman of Jefferson Davis County, Mississippi, and her great-granddaughter, Selma Leander Haynes Sanders, my grandmother, who was born on June 6, 1935, and passed from this life and into the next on November 13, 2024. Before proceeding with the rest of our program, we would also like to pause and ask you all to join us in holding space for a brief moment of silence in honor and remembrance of Malia, Sylvia, and to all of the other named and unnamed ancestors who have gone before us, and to whose memory this project and this evening's gathering is dedicated. Thank you.
Before we begin tonight's discussion, we would like to express our gratitude to those who have helped make this event possible. First, we'd like to thank our sponsors, the Diaspora Solidarities Lab, Life Xcode Digital Humanities Against Enclosure, specifically its Assistant Director, Dr. Nadejda Webb, the Johns Hopkins University Center for Africana Studies. Special thanks to its director, Dr. Minka Makalani, the Program for the Study of Women, Gender, and Sexuality, the Billie Holiday Center for Liberation Arts, Inheritance, Baltimore. Special thanks to Dr. Lawrence Jackson and Dr. Nathan Connolly, and the Program in Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx Studies, with additional support from Endeavor Data Science for the Digital Humanities, the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences at JHU. Special thanks to Dean Christopher Silenza, and the University of Maryland Department of African American and Africana Studies, Foundation's grant. The Past and Future of Black Studies. Special thanks goes to Dr. John Drabinski and Dr. Ashley Newby, as well as to Rachel Schubach and Sharon Hodgson. Deep gratitude to the Baltimore Museum of Art for hosting our event, and specific thanks to Tracy Beal, Anya Jika, Faith McCorkle, and Natasha Talia for their assistance and support through the planning of this event, without whom this would not have been possible. Special thanks to Jessica Bell Brown for her generous consultation and counsel in the very early stages of planning this collaboration. Special thanks to Hiro Amano at Open Range Video for making virtual attendance possible, and Jennifer Ann and Cheryl Cooper at Joyful Signing for the ASL interpretation. Thank you to Mira's Kitchen Collective and Sounds by Seven, who will be providing food and music at the reception in the Fox Courts after this talk.
And finally, we would also like to thank Dr. Jessica Marie Johnson and Dr. Yomaira Figueroa Vasquez for believing in us and for their mentorship, for creating space and providing resources to graduate students and emerging scholars like us. If they had not taken a chance on us back then, Remains and Archive would not have come into being. I would not have met wonderful fellows who later became a vital source of support for me as a graduate student, and certainly would not have met Jessica and Samantha, from whom I have learned immensely in the past 2 years and have come to love dearly. So thank you both. In tonight's discussion, moderated by Samantha and myself, we invite Jessica alongside our guests Tatiana, Romaine, Sha-Shonna, and Julia to reflect on their collaboration, their relationship with Malia, and how the idea of motion is activated in their work. And finally, we will invite Dr. Jessica Marie Johnson to the stage to deliver closing remarks. Now it is our honor to invite to the stage Tatiana Esh, who is a Brooklyn-based sculptor of sound, color, cinema, and story. Her favorite mediums, you can clap. Her favorite mediums include ink, watercolor, song, and poetry.
We'd also like to invite Romaine McNeil, who is a Jamaican-based artist who uses brushstrokes, palette knives, and enigmatic concepts to transcend ordinary thinking and emotions into powerful and provocative images on canvas. Romaine is originally from the parish of Westmoreland, Jamaica. Big up yourself, Romaine.
Next, we have Sha-Shonna Rogers, a multidisciplinary artist with a focus on cinematography and still photography from West Baltimore, Maryland, and is a current senior at Morgan State University. Drawing inspiration from her everyday surroundings and the pulse of her community, her creative style is shaped by her environment, resulting in narratives that pulse with life and truth.
And finally, Julia Mallory is a storyteller committed to being a good steward of and vessel for her ancestors' stories. Her foundational creative love language is poetry, and she moves between genres with a range of mediums from text to textiles. Her latest loves include creating stop-motion animated collages and building 1006, a multi-generational community space for collective learning, connection, and creativity. Julia is the mother of 3 children and is from the south side of Harrisburg.
Y'all can applaud again. Hello, hello. Hi. Before we get into the questions, I would love to be able to, give a little bit more context as to how these works first appeared. So a while back, I had the pleasure of co-curating with Dr. Mary Penna the exhibition titled Coastal Relations, Enacting Diaspora, which is an exhibition that was featured at the Avery Research Center in Charleston, South Carolina. The purpose of that exhibition was to accompany a final symposium hosted by the Diaspora Solidarities Lab. The final symposium was this moment of gathering, culmination of the 3 years of amazing work by wonderful fellows and PIs and artists and community fellows to celebrate each other, to celebrate the work that we've done, and to close the first iteration of that project. In that moment, when we were thinking about what could be possible for the exhibition, there was also an opportunity for the microlabs to participate and to exhibit some of their work. When that opportunity came up, I spoke with Jessica and we talked about what would be possible for Remains in Archive. And slowly but surely, Slavery in Motion came to be. So back in October of 2024, yes, we're now in 2025, we got to see the artworks in person for the first time. And so the artists actually, in the process of collaboration, we're always meeting virtually. And so at the symposium, they got to see the pieces in person for the first time all together. So that also means that they were all in Charleston with us. So I would like to ask all of you to maybe give us, offer some reflections on that moment of seeing the works in person together, and what it was like to see them together in conversation with each other. I don't know if anyone would like to get us started.
Thank you, Kevin. The experience of being in Charleston to begin with was incredible because I had the dual pleasure of attending as a community fellow as well as an artist. So incredible people from all over the world who are doing amazing community and care-based work as part of their scholarship. It just meant so much to be there. And then to see the works in person, for me, it just made it real because essentially they had just been a bunch of digital files. And so then to see them manifested in a physical form and, see the poetry printed out, see the mechanisms for which people could listen to them, it just made it so much more real and tangible. And then to see the incredible works of who I'm calling my creative cohort, to see them all in conversation with each other, I think it really spoke to how we all have our own unique gifts and sight. And even though we're working with the same information, how we can interpret it and translate it and transport folks to what we're thinking and what we're feeling, and to see it all manifested together just was incredible.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to add to that, being at the Avery Center was a very profound experience for me. And meeting all the other wonderful artists and seeing the work. I actually stepped into the space and I didn't see my work. And I think it's because I was so taken aback by the other projects and the other pieces that were in the space. And I think what was amazing is that even though I'm the artist that created the work, I became the viewer watching the conversations taking place among the pieces and how they interacted with each other without even the presence of the artist there. And I think that was just amazing that you get a hold of the information, and because of our different life experiences, we were able to create something that was so different, but something that was so captivatingly a unit. And I think that experience for me was just beautiful.
And I think also it was special because even though we had met on Zoom beforehand and had been talking throughout the year, we hadn't seen any of each other's work. And so we were creating in silos. And it was really interesting for me because I felt like I had developed such an intimate relationship with Malia and Sylvia and all the other women that Jessica has written about. And so then to see how Julia and Romaine and Sha-Shonna had engaged and worked with Malia was amazing.
I agree with what everybody said, but it's interesting. That was actually my second time going to the Avery Center, but the first time I went to the Avery Center, I went with an organization that I'm a part of called New Generation Scholars when I was 20, I believe. And we went to study like the Gullah Geechee culture of South Carolina and everything. And I remember going to the Avery Center specifically and being so captivated by the history of the Avery Center and feeling so amazed. I remember, I think it's on the second floor. It's a wall in there where you could see the fingerprints of the people who built the building. And also Charleston being a place that my family, I believe, like we migrated from Charleston to New York, also feeling like it was so much history that I had to uncover and that I felt like so many emotions. And I ended up doing a short film that first time I went. And to be back in 2024, now at 23, it kind of felt like this full circle moment. I think when I was preparing to go, I didn't know what I would feel. Feeling like it was so much left that I had to like figure out about myself in Charleston, about my family, and then going there for Malia's extension, not knowing like what I would feel seeing it in that space. But when I got there, I remember feeling like an immense amount of gratitude, I think, almost to the point where like it felt like it wasn't enough gratitude there for me to give. It was beautiful seeing like my film in conversation with everybody else's film, and like everybody else said, like you said, Romaine said, it felt like a unit. It was like we were working in different spaces, but it was almost as if we were working alongside each other in the physical. So I thought that's what I felt my experience was like.
Yeah, thank you. I am going to ask Jessica to speak a little bit about your encounter with the works, because you've seen it at several stages as well. But before that, I also forgot to give a shout out to Darren Calhoun from the Avery Research Center, who helped for expediting the shipment, because the exhibition actually closed last week. And so for it to arrive just in time for our event tonight, that was no coincidence. It was all thanks to Darren. So I wanted to shout out because I think he's tuning in virtually. So Jessica, I would love to hear a little bit about, your reflections at several stages in terms of your first encounter in the making, because I know you saw a glimpse of the progress, and then seeing them all together at the Avery.
So I think a helpful piece of context for my reflection on seeing the pieces as a finished unit was an intention that I set for myself when I was when I was first considering approaching artists in the first place, considering sharing what my research, which felt at the time still very tentative and very new, and I wasn't even decided yet as to what I was going to write my dissertation on. This was just, the initial idea at first was just a paper that I had written in my first year at Johns Hopkins. And so I had to decide, well, how much am I going to share and how specific do I need to be? And then also deciding how much of the way that I see Malia do I want to project or share with the artist versus how much do I want it to be organic, and try to allow them to have as refreshed and an unfiltered perspective of her as possible. And I should add that was a little bit scary for me. I was still just a second-year PhD student, and I wasn't sure if I did set that intention, what was going to happen. But I had mentioned earlier that I had first encountered Malia's story over a decade ago when I was just an undergraduate student. And I saw her in a very specific way at that time. And that over the course of the years that followed, I went through a gradual unseeing. I had to unlearn a lot of things that I knew about her and begin to see her in a new way, which is the way that I tried to write about her in the paper. And I wanted the artist to not have to go through that. It was a really laborious process. And so I set an intention when I went to approach them that I really would just share what I had, share what was in the archive, and then see what would happen. And that was really scary because I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know, would that make it worse, like worse, or what would come out of that. And so I share all of that to say that over the course of the next 1.5 years, when they shared little narrative descriptions of what they were getting from my paper, from my research notes, from the transcripts of the archive, I was just floored. I couldn't, it was really incredible to me, the things that they were seeing that resonated so much with me that I had spent a really long time asking myself, well, if other historians don't see Malia this way and I'm the only one that's seeing her, is there something wrong with my vision if it hasn't been said yet? And so when they were coming back to me saying, well, I keep being drawn to her daughter, or I keep being drawn to these moments of fugitivity that she has and these moments where she's trying to find solitude of herself. It's just like, wow, I felt heard and I felt seen and I felt validated. And that is what made seeing the finished pieces in Charleston and seeing the cohesion that was between all of the pieces. It was, I almost can't put what that feeling was into words, because none of us, like Sha-Shonna and I are based in Baltimore, but we still met virtually with each other. When we met virtually. So we were disconnected from each other, but when you see the pieces together, it's remarkable to me how cohesive it is that they are as a whole. And so that's a very long way of answering your question, Kevin, to say that it was humbling in the best kind of way.
Yeah, and I know the audience is dying to see the pieces. So we do have them here, but there are 2 other ones that are audiovisual. So I'm going to start with Romaine's. Which is titled Freedom in Becoming. So Romaine, can you tell us a little bit about your piece and what inspired your work?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jessica, for inviting me to be a part of this project. It's truly an honor. And I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to approach it. I just knew that it was going to have an effect on me because I'm from the area where she was, and it took me a minute to settle in. And once I got settled in and I kept on rereading certain parts of the notes, it started to come to me like how it was going to come out. And everything just flowed after that, down to the colors that are being used. I needed to represent her in a bright light, but still have something that grounded the image. And I wanted to preserve her purity, her innocence, even though she was written about in such a very harsh way. She was rebellious and she just had this energy of untamedness. And I love that, because you're taken away from your family at such a young age. You're sold and you're resold. And on top of that, you're flogged and you're a mom and you lose your child. And there's so much to explore in that. And I think I was drawn to focus on keeping that purity and that innocence within her. And so I created it from that. I created the balance scale because she kept on running away because there's nothing left for me to lose. So I'm just going to keep running away and find the peace for myself because it's not going to be given. And the compass is just like the direction in which she would take. I feel as if it was her way of reconnecting with Sylvia, her daughter. It was reconnecting, helping her to reconnect with her past, helping her to stay grounded in who she is and wanted to be, and not just be viewed as some slave girl. You know, and I really wanted to preserve that image of her in my work, and that was like the approach.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. The next one we would like to show the audience is Tatiana's beautiful painting titled Hide and Seek. So, Tatiana.
So when I originally started working on this project, I was most drawn to the word seasoning. And I think this is like the 8th painting that I didn't finish any of them. This is the only one I finished. And originally I was gonna call it seasoning off of this word that Jessica taught me, that basically once the captured West Africans were taken to Jamaica, they were placed in the care of an individual who was already enslaved on the island through a process called seasoning, and they would basically teach them English and just teach them about how to survive. And so I was really drawn to that word because of, food, seasoning. I was drawn to that word because of a season of someone's life. But then when I started painting, nothing was really sticking. And there came this one Saturday where I was like, okay, this 7th iteration is not it. Let me just start over. And I just immediately started bawling. I cried a lot. And I just started drawing and I couldn't stop. And I realized that what I was most drawn to was Malia's relationship with her daughter, Sylvia. And just questioning what she was doing during these moments of escape. And I realized that when she was kidnapped, she was 15 years old and she was 4'6". She was a child and she had lost her child. And all I could think to do was play a game of hide and seek. So I called it Hide and Go Seek. And I was just super drawn to the vividness of the bush. I was thinking about a tree that was larger than life, and I was thinking about what she was leaving behind. So I was thinking about the sugar cane and the fact that she's going there so nobody can follow her. She's going there for moments of solace. She's going there to find her people across the island. And so, I was really inspired by all of that. And I was inspired by the moon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's an element of playfulness in your work. Next, I would like to ask Sha-Shonna to speak a little bit about your piece before we show it, and it's titled Malia's Extension.
For me, when I was going through the research, I remember the first things that kept popping out to me was legacy and motherhood. And I think it's because legacy is something that I think a lot about. I think a lot about the past generations, the future generations, but specifically for Malia, it was she wasn't given the opportunity to really carry on her legacy in the physical. Thinking about the loss of her daughter, Sylvia, it was this wonder that I had of what would Sylvia be like if Malia was able to raise her child past 15 months, if she wasn't taken from her and forced to just go through the horrors of slavery, which is out of her control. Who would Sylvia be? How would she experience her? And I think for Malia's extension, I kind of wanted to pull from experiences that Malia had, which is when you'll see the water, the movement, the dancing, because I believe dance is a way that we connect spiritually to a lot of things, but wanting this film to be a spiritual connection of Sylvia, more so me falling more into the energy of Sylvia and giving almost a Malia, if I could talk to Malia or show Malia a glimpse of what her daughter would have been like and all the possibilities. But I think I was also inspired by the women around me, the mothers around me, my friends who are Jamaican descendant, and just having conversations with them all the time. One of my good sisters, Shania, who you'll see in the film, being a Jamaican descendant from Brooklyn, but me and her talking all day about just like her wanting to go back, her wanting to like reconnect with her Brooklyn like heritage more. I mean, not Brooklyn, her Jamaican heritage more. But that was my main inspiration for it, and Malia's extensions being just the legacy part. But I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope that you feel like it did it justice, Jessica.
Thank you. So we'll cue it on the screen.
My Sylvia, you are the parts of me uncaptivated. All the parts of me that had seeped through my pain, agony, and fight. You are the parts of me that have been extended.
And finally, I would like to ask Julia to speak a little bit about her work, which is titled The Mighty Malia, but we will be showcasing an excerpt from that series. Two poems titled Little Lucy in the Lunar Loop and Sylvia Speaks.
Whew, I just have to take a very deep breath after watching Sha-Shonna's film. I watched it even most recently earlier, but it just really hit me just now. I think my connection, and it feeds into my discussion of the pieces, because I remember when Jessica first talked to me about Malia. I was walking around my neighborhood and she was telling me about Malia's story. And I felt an instant connection as a child loss survivor. And so in watching Sha-Shonna's piece, part of my healing journey was to like flee to the forest. And so in Malia's story, like I recognize kind of this break that happens in deep grief. And I was really drawn to her defiance, like an emotional defiance that says that like what has happened to me hurts, and being able to show that outward, just this outward rejection of like a lack of acknowledgement for Black grief. And so in Malia's story, I just felt so connected to her ability to just flee, to just not be useful. Even when she knows that is very difficult, right, to be permanently in marriage, right? Like even her momentary marriage, I think is so radical in a sense. And then the two pieces, like we're gonna actually talk about the children, and some of my work, I talk about this concept of the special specter, and Sylvia, and in Little Lucy, like that's how I see them. And I imagine that even like Sylvia being like connecting to her mom, and I'm thinking of like Malia following, the sound of her voice, or just, just needing that connection, because we know that that she dies while her mom is away, right? And I just see her as like always like needing that connection. And then with Little Lucy in the Lunar Loop, I'm trying to honor like the communal grief, like these folks that are gathering to pay their respects to a young life that was lost, but that was essentially still a miracle, because the death rates for young people were so high. And so, like Little Lucy being like her life already being a miracle essentially, and the devastation that I imagine that those community of enslaved folks felt, to kind of even lose like possibly a beacon of hope. So I wanted to honor, like I was trying to like connect and honor like all of those stories. And since poetry is my first creative love language, I was honored to be asked to write poetry. So I wrote 5 poems, and I had also been working in sound a little bit around that time. So I made these sonic collages and put these tracks together. And there have been some things that have been on my spirit for a couple years. And one of them was wanting to work with a Black opera singer. And someone connected me with a Black opera soprano out in Pittsburgh named Chantel Brazil, who supported me in with her amazing voice. And so these tracks are like, I don't know. I just put everything I had in the moment to like build something that I wanted to just honor and connect with Malia in the ways that felt the most organic to me.
Thank you. We're going to hear it.
This little body of mine, this little body of mine, I'm gonna lay it down.
See, the Lord rides on a swift cloud and is coming to Egypt. Isaiah 19.
When the weary-bodied mourners set out from Egypt, the sky dark ink working its way through endless water, sun and moon guarding the dusky heavens, dirt swirling beneath the heavy steps of their tired procession as the wind marched alongside them, casting dust on their saltwater trails. The October air held their tears and put a rainbow around the moon. Little Lucy, almost ancient at almost 11, almost arrived at her Earthside anniversary, now a guardian of their galaxy, as Sylvie and her sky skip across stars. The Egyptians return, moving through the indigo darkness, following the shrill of their splintering hearts. Kindred, my November sister, you've been on my mind. In the beyond, I'm gifted wisdom, me make magic and mischief, like turning back his cruelty on himself. Let it gnash at his insides and divide everything he think he love. When Mommy Molia weeps in her sleep, I want to meet her in the deep blue green of her dreams, salt water dripping from her hair. I touch where the beast marked her, a roll of raised flesh, its sheen flash warning. She washed me in the water and it rolled in me eyes, turn her crystal. She stroked my feet until the sun falls and our laughed, stretched mouths. Mommy, look up, find me, a cloud, a hint of cover, like you wrap me, like you love me. You brought me to this side and swelled my transient soul. This little body of mine, I'm gonna lay it down.
I'm gonna lay it down. Lay it down.
Wow, I'm always so stunned to hear and to see the works that you all have created. And I I still recall the first time I heard Julia's piece, and I saw Sha-Shonna's piece, and I saw Tatiana's and Romaine's, and it never gets old. It never, it always touches at least my spirits. And I just find it so fascinating, as you all have worked independently but also collaboratively, the ways that Malia's story has come alive in all these different forms and genres, from the, I don't know, being buried in the, I don't know, opacity of Thistlewood's handwriting that Jessica had to like excavate in a way, to be in these forms for you today. And so I'm just really curious about your engagement with Malia as a person, like as a girl, as a woman. Yeah, like how would you describe your relationship with Malia? And maybe, or even like how has that relationship activated something in your creative practice? Anyone can be free to start.
Well, for me, it kind of started me on this personal journey of risk taking, especially in my work, because I kind of sometimes would tiptoe around themes because I didn't want to upset anyone. And as an artist, you can't do that. You have to be truthful. And I think the more I read about her and the more I saw how resilient she was, it's like, well, you know what? We're homies now. I'm going to take a page out of your book and I'm going to start doing some of the things that you took. You didn't wait on anyone to give it to you. You took it. And for me, it was that energy that has now started like this ripple effect of doing more Afrocentric work and being more unapologetic about the approach to bringing forward truth about our struggles and our suffering and our pain, because nobody's going to give you a floor to express that. You have to take the floor, because Malia took that for herself because she knew she needed it. And I think that the more you're able to do this introspection, the more you're able to see that it is necessary. It is a necessary journey for you to be on. So that for me, she helped to push me in that direction. Like, just take the risks. You have nothing to lose by taking the risk, but you have so much to gain. Because when she took the risk in running away and trying to find that peace and to reconnect, it was for her benefit, and it outweighed all the floggings and punishments that she could endure during that time. It didn't matter, because for her, it was important to regain that peace of mind. And I think for me, that is what really stood out in connecting with Malia.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think for me, a way that I feel like Malia has like activated herself and within my work is to trust faith, but to also like let spirit guide me. I remember like working on this film, and for like I feel like through most of the process just overthinking everything, overthinking like how the film would be perceived. Was I telling Malia and Sylvia's story in the best way that I could? Was I doing all that I could? Like yesterday we had a conversation about just the process of studying, and within that process feeling like, was I doing enough studying, and all of these things that I think I kind of like thought myself, like I stressed myself out with all of these thoughts and just wanting like all of these answers. But I remember when I had did the scene in the water that y'all seen in the film, and even during that day I remember I was thinking so many different things, like trying to like envision like how would Malia walk through the water, how would she stand, how would she turn her head and everything. But it wasn't until I think like the sun was like setting that I kind of had to like release myself a little bit, and was just like the camera. I think a lot of times it's like this usage thing, but the camera is like a vessel in a way, and like allowing myself to also be a vessel for spirit, Malia, but wanted to continue that and like the next pieces that I do, and to just trust the process more.
Wow, it really seems like between the two of you so far, like Malia has guided you in her activity, in her refusal, in your camera work and all of that. Like, it's really amazing how she can kind of transcend like time and space in that way. Yeah, and I'm just also thinking, Tatiana, of I'm just curious about, your experience with all the iterations of the paintings that you did. And, finally, it seems like you felt like that kind of connection in the version that we saw that's right on stage. Yeah, so I'm curious about that.
I think for me, I was deeply intimidated because usually when I'm creating, it's always characters that are straight from my head. And the fact that Malia is and was a real person was something that I was super intimidated by because I didn't want to put her in a bad light. You know what I mean? I don't think that would have been possible. But more than that was put her in a light that she might not agree with. Because usually when I paint or draw, it's always portraits. And so that was another thing that was really intimidating, was this was kind of my first time attempting to like portray like a natural, like a scene in that way. And the reason I leaned more towards that was because I was just so afraid of drawing her, of painting her. And I'm really grateful for all of the Zoom meetings that we were having because I found that we were all feeling the same intimidation. And genuinely, if not for Julia, I don't think this piece would have happened. We were like, are we allowed to share what we're working on? But she was gracious enough to open up to me about some of the things that she was feeling. And we both realized that we were like so drawn to this relationship with Sylvia and that we were kind of, our imagination was going in the exact same direction. And then the same with Jessica. We just kept seeing her, but not necessarily seeing her face. And so that's why in the painting, like neither one of the characters, you see their face. I don't want to spoil too much of what the story is behind the painting, so I'm not going to talk too much about who the characters are. Obviously, they're both Malia. Anyways, yeah, so yeah, I was really intimidated, but similar to what Romaine just said, like you just gotta take the risk.
I think in connecting with Malia's story, for me, it was like, what type of a storyteller do I want to be? Right? When there's like an absence of certain information, what am I going to fill it in with? And so, quite honestly, even though I know they're very much inside of a cruel system, the cruelty is the obvious part, right? So I just felt like when there were gaps in my understanding or what we knew, I wanted to add something that, like moments of relief. Even though, so one of the things is that we know, like Sylvia gets shipped to Savannah. I'm sorry, Malia gets shipped to Savannah. And in my mind, I'm always like, is there something, does she actually finally get away? So working with Malia's story just made me feel like, can I do that more in my stories? I'm very invested in, do Black folks win at the end? Do they get away at the end? Do they survive in the end? And so that's just the energy that I want to, when it's all made up anyway, right? It's just like, oh, I'm gonna make choices that try to honor that. So yeah, that's I think the story, working with Malia and Sylvia's story just made me want to just be consistent in that way.
Wow, and yeah, like the question of survival that you're bringing up is so tied and wrapped up in movement and motion. And something I wanted us to think about together was the title of this event and the multimedia art collection, Slavery in Motion. And so I'd like, each of you to speak to the significance of motion, broadly defined, in your work. Because you might think of the physical movement of Malia through Westmoreland, motion in performance art, or the motion of like a paintbrush, or even the movement together here in Baltimore from all these different places, or even how working on this project has moved you like internally. Or on an emotional level. I might pick on Jessica to talk about slavery in motion as you've conceived it.
Yeah, so I guess I can start. Obviously, motion was huge for me when I wrote the paper. The first paper that I wrote was named Country Named Malia, Women in Slavery in Motion in 18th Century Jamaica. And that paper, I called it that because the structure of the paper moved with Malia through several different positionalities. And motion was both this figurative and literal theme of her life that made me see her in a way that I didn't see her represented within the existing historical writings on her life, but also in slavery in Jamaica. And so looking at her within those specific moments of movement were critical too, because what I saw was, of course, running away 14 times is notable. So you'll see historians mention that she runs away 14 times, but they don't really zero in on what's happening in those moments of motion. And so I slowed down and actually looked at, well, where is she going? What can I discern what the places are? What are these places like? The archive that she's found in was by her owner, and he kept a very detailed record of enslaved labor, but he was also very taken with the weather. And so for every day that Malia was enslaved in Jamaica, there is a very detailed record of what the weather was like. And so if she is this very frequent fugitive, I slowed down in those moments of motion, and I was thinking, well, what's the weather like when she's out there? What are the conditions that she's enduring? And it's in those moments of where there's archival silence that's actually very loud, if you know how to look for it. And so motion for me was a way of first being able to want to look for, and then seeing what at first I thought wasn't there in the first place.
I think, as you mentioned, all of the different ways that, motion can be represented. I don't know. I think I'm like, even in this moment as we're talking about it, I'm also like, oh, like emotion too. And I don't know, I'm obsessed now with just really understanding the way that the world like tries to suppress and deny Black emotion. And so this project is just, it really opens that up for me. Also motion, like in a modern sense of like the slang term where people like have motion, like, you're doing the most, or, so I'm even thinking of Malia, because I fictionalize, like we have the 14 attempts on record, but I imagine that it's like more like 17. And I write about that in one of the poems. I'm like, oh, there's more times that y'all just didn't know about, right? So that's just me, like, again, just trying to, within the confines of this cruel institution, what is additional defiance that I can add to this. So I think, and I'm just also like, how is this story continuing to move throughout each of us? And even on the spirit side of things, like how is Malia and Sylvia, how are their spirits still moving or making magic and motion from a different realm? So I would say in this moment, that's what is speaking to me about motion.
I'm very happy that you kind of introduced emotion into it, because I think in one of the when she escaped, she actually brought another slave girl with her, and I think that it's like movement is infectious, and so if you go to somebody else and you're introducing them to this movement, then it becomes like almost enticing, and I think it creates a ripple effect, and it just doesn't stay with her. And motion tends to do that. It's breaking barriers and building bridges. It's not stagnation. And I think that's what is one of the things that's really profound about Molia, is that she was hell bent on doing this in her motion, like constantly and constantly. And if you I think the weather during that time, if my mind is serving me correct, it's during like the hurricane season. And that in itself is like motion, because when you have wind and rain and water and flood, it's like she's moving with that and she's using that to create force. And I think that's just beautiful when you think about motion and emotion in that way.
If I could just say something really, really quickly. So when you said about, like motion is infectious, and then, one of the times that Malia flees, like she takes someone else with her. And I had the image, like there's always this thing about, they're like, oh, when black folks see somebody run, then it's like everybody just start running. Like you don't even know what's going on, but you just like, So I just had to, that part just came up to me.
Yeah, and I think another thing I want to call attention to is something that Jessica reminded me of like very early on, which is that Jamaica is an island, and when you are escaping on an island, there is no north or like promise of freedom or place to go per se. And so that was another thing that we all talked about this yesterday that we were thinking about, is like how she would escape solely for herself. And there would be times when she would be gone for like 8 hours and then she would just come back. There would be, and then the longest was 29 days. And I believe, if memory serves, at one point when they had found her, she was where they had already looked. So just thinking about how other enslaved women were helping protect and support each other. And another time that she had escaped, right after Sylvia had passed away, she made it all the way to the opposite side of the island, where she was found at the same pen or plantation with her shipmate, one of the individuals that she had come across the ocean with. And I don't think she had seen her in like 2 years. And so even thinking about how like word of mouth spreads and how telephone works and how they were able to create these networks in order to make all of this possible.
I think for me, when I'm hearing motion, the first thing I'm thinking of is like, as a filmmaker, motion picture, like that's like the first thing. But I think as a Black filmmaker, like a big thing for me, like recently that I've been revisiting, like this quote that we also was talking about yesterday by Haley Garima, great filmmaker. If y'all ever seen a film like Sankofa, but Haley Garima was saying that for him as a Black filmmaker, like his main thing as people who are suffering from colonization, and like we're always going to be at like this constant battle with like healing from colonization, that it's important for him to never contaminate his own people with films, with his own films, with the power of like the motion picture. And I think I've been thinking about that a lot as an emerging filmmaker, it's just, or as a grown filmmaker, to make sure my work is doing my people justice all the time. And thinking about Malia and the power within being able to create a film around a woman whose story wasn't told. This is the first time that it's been like really brought out. and is so deserving of having her story told, and thinking about the many other women who were enslaved whose stories are still untold, but also thinking about the motion of time and how this is a story from, I believe, it's the 18th century, but now in 2025, the story has traveled, and like a group of artists, it's so beautiful to have a group of artists, so amazing to bring this story to fruition. And I guess like that's like the power of motion, that overall power of like the movement of art and the intention behind it.
Well, that's wow. So I'm sorry, I'm just really amazed by the sensitivity, the care for Malia's story, for Sylvia, for Lucy, for all of these enslaved women who survive, who in a way, survive the archive, survive the constraints of like the fragmentation and the violence and the misrepresentation. And I'm just really struck and impressed by the way that you all collectively have really attended to this and witnessed her story and how it continues, how it extends towards the present, towards the future. With that,
I know that for a fact that folks in the audience, virtually and in person, are dying to read Malia's story. You'll just have to wait a little bit. But be on the lookout for Jessica Newby's work. It's coming. It's coming. Future Dr. Newby. And I will say, because Jessica will not say that, but Jessica's writing of Malia's story, I mean, I've had the privilege of reading it, and it is done with such care and wit. Yeah, you could tell on the page that she's there to fight. So I just really want to accentuate that because I think her writing is a work of art. So, yeah. So before we conclude the evening, I would love to invite to the stage Dr. Jessica Marie Johnson to give us some closing remarks. And after Dr. Johnson's remarks, please join us at the Fox Court for a reception and some music.
Dear Malia, I hope you know we heard you when you wrote your story 14 times that we know of. Your body become testimony. You here in this room, the 6th member of this creative cohort. Your refusal, your yearning, and your grief. Did you think no one would mourn you? Wicked woman, wicked flesh on wild soil. We do. No, you're a bad girl. You knew you were infecting us with your freedom ways, inoculating us with resistance. You knew you would meet a young sorceress, time travel to each other. Malia, we believe you. Jessica Newby, thank you for listening for what remains. Thank you for being fertile ground for that listening and for the community you made and have made together as a micro lab in the Diaspora Solidarities Lab. Romaine, Tatiana, Julia, Sha-Shonna, who I've known a long time. Thank you so much for following on the trail that Malia set in motion, that Malia and Jessica met somewhere together, for creating this portal that has created this space where we can learn from her, Malia, and Jessica, where we can witness Malia, the scholar, write her story and hear it heard and place it on this stage. There are many sponsors that were thanked. I want to second that thank you, because this work does not happen in a vacuum. And more, this is the work that must be done. I am a historian of slavery because I truly believe that the history of slavery is meant to radicalize us. It is not a story of shame. The shame is not mine. It is not a story of despair solely, as has been said on this stage, and I think we see it in this art. It is a story that's meant to help us chart pathways of resistance and refusal. It's a story that's meant to inspire us 14 times that we know of. And it's a story that we will need to learn from and be even more deeply attuned to in the coming days, in the coming weeks, in the coming months, in the coming years. This project did not anticipate next week. It also sort of knew next week would be somewhere in the map. And it offers its own kind of parable that we can learn from, and its own roadmap for how to move forward. This is the time I hear, as Mother Morrison said, that artists get to work, so these artists got to work. It is also the time when scholars hunker down and get into the archive, into the research and the reading that is our guild, that is our practice, and that is our privilege. We do not have the luxury of turning away. So thank you, everyone on this stage, for seeing clearly Malia, all the things she was trying to say, and for continuing to see what she is trying to say, and all the other women, to think with Sha-Shonna's gorgeous film, all the other women, all the other people, all the other personhoods that are waiting and speaking and ready to help teach us how to meet this moment. Thank you all so much. It has been a privilege and an honor to be with you all, Romaines, and to be in anywhere in your directorship. It is beyond. I could not. It is a gift. So thank you.